You didn't lose her because of one argument. You lost her because the version of you she kept experiencing stopped feeling safe, attractive, or emotionally reliable. Most men think the solution is convincing her to come back. It's not. Because attraction doesn't return through persuasion, it returns when her experience of you changes. If you ruin the relationship through insecurity, jealousy, emotional neediness, dishonesty, inconsistency, or taking her for granted, there's something you need to understand. The mistake isn't what destroys attraction, the inability to grow beyond that mistake does. People don't come back because you miss them, they come back because they no longer recognize the person who pushed them away. Today, we're going to talk about exactly how that happens. The first mistake most people make after ruining a relationship is believing they can erase the past if they just say the right words. They replay every conversation in their mind, searching for the perfect apology or the perfect explanation that will suddenly make everything okay again. They send long messages, write emotional paragraphs, promise that they have changed, and hope that if they can express enough regret, the other person will forget the pain they experienced. But relationships don't work that way. Emotional memories are not rewritten by powerful speeches. They are rewritten by consistent experiences. If someone spent months feeling unheard, disrespected, neglected, or emotionally exhausted, those feelings don't disappear because you finally found the right words to describe your intentions. People judge relationships by patterns, not isolated moments. One of the hardest psychological truths to accept is that your intentions matter far less than your impact. You may never have wanted to hurt her. You may have believed you were trying your best. But if your behavior repeatedly made her feel anxious, unimportant, controlled, or emotionally unsafe, then those emotions became her reality. Many people spend so much time defending what they meant that they never take responsibility for what they consistently created. The more you explain yourself, the more it can sound like you're asking her to question her own experience instead of acknowledging it. Real accountability begins when you stop arguing with someone else's feelings and start examining your own behavior. Another common mistake is confusing repeated apologies with personal growth. An apology has value when it recognizes the pain you've caused and accepts responsibility without excuses. But once that apology has been made sincerely, repeating it over and over usually serves your need for relief more than the other person's need for healing. Constantly saying, "I'm sorry," doesn't automatically rebuild trust. In fact, repeated apologies without visible change often lose their meaning. They become familiar words attached to familiar behavior. Trust is never restored because someone feels guilty. It is restored because someone becomes consistently different. This is why trying to undo the past often creates even more distance. Every emotional message, every attempt to convince her to give you another chance, and every desperate effort to make her remember the good times can unintentionally place pressure on her. Instead of giving her space to process her own emotions, you ask her to manage yours. Instead of allowing your actions to speak over time, you demand immediate reassurance. Pressure rarely creates attraction. More often, it creates resistance, because people naturally pull away when they feel responsible for fixing someone else's emotional state. Psychologically, human beings trust observation far more than promises. Anyone can promise to be more patient after an argument. Anyone can swear they will never repeat the same mistake again. But real confidence in another person develops only after seeing those promises reflected in everyday behavior. Emotional consistency is what changes perception. Calm responses replace angry reactions. Honest communication replaces defensiveness. Accountability replaces excuses. Healthy boundaries replace emotional dependence. These changes cannot be rushed because genuine transformation takes time to become believable. Accepting that you cannot erase the past is not admitting defeat. It is choosing reality over wishful thinking. The relationship you had cannot be recreated by pretending the mistakes never happened. It can only evolve if the person who made those mistakes becomes someone who no longer repeats them. The past will always exist as part of your story, but it doesn't have to define the person you become next. One of the biggest reasons people never repair a broken relationship is because they misunderstand why it ended in the first place. They focus on the final argument, the breakup conversation, or the one mistake that seemed to change everything. They tell themselves, if I hadn't said that, or if we hadn't argued that night, we'd still be together. But relationships rarely end because of a single moment. More often, the breakup is the result of emotional patterns that slowly weaken attraction and trust over time. The final argument is usually just the moment when accumulated frustration becomes impossible to ignore. If you only focus on the last incident, you'll completely miss the deeper issues that had been building for weeks, months, or even years. Many men assume the problem was poor communication because that's the easiest explanation. But communication is often just the surface. The real question is what your communication made her feel. Did she feel respected when she expressed her opinions? Or did every disagreement turn into a debate you had to win? Did she feel emotionally safe enough to be honest with you? Or was she constantly worried about your reactions? Did she feel appreciated? Or did she slowly begin to believe that her efforts were taken for granted? Attraction fades when negative emotional experiences become more frequent than positive ones. People don't walk away simply because conversations become difficult. They walk away because those conversations repeatedly leave them feeling unheard, dismissed, or emotionally drained. Sometimes the issue isn't what you did, but what you failed to do. You may have stopped showing appreciation because you assumed she already knew how you felt. You may have become comfortable and slowly stopped investing in the relationship. You may have allowed work, distractions, or personal stress to consume your attention while expecting her to simply understand. Relationships don't usually collapse because love disappears overnight. They weaken when consistent effort disappears. Emotional neglect is often quieter than conflict, but it can be just as damaging. Feeling invisible inside a relationship is one of the fastest ways for emotional connection to fade. Another common pattern is emotional dependence disguised as love. At first, wanting to spend every moment together can feel romantic. But over time, if your confidence, happiness, or sense of identity becomes dependent on her constant reassurance, the relationship starts carrying a weight it was never designed to hold. She begins feeling responsible not only for the relationship, but also for your emotional stability. That pressure slowly replaces attraction with obligation. Healthy relationships are built between two emotionally whole people, not one person carrying the emotional balance of both. This is why accountability matters so much. Accountability is not about blaming yourself for everything that went wrong or convincing yourself that you were a terrible partner. It's about being honest enough to identify the habits, reactions, and beliefs that repeatedly damage the relationship. Excuses protect your ego, but they also protect the behaviors that cause the problem. Growth begins the moment you stop asking, "Why did she leave?" and start asking, "What kind of experience did I consistently create for her?" That question shifts your focus from defending your intentions to understanding your impact. And understanding your impact is what allows real change to begin. After a relationship ends, fear has a way of taking control before logic has a chance to catch up. The fear of losing someone you love can convince you that you need to act immediately. You feel an overwhelming urge to call, text, explain yourself, apologize again, or ask for one more conversation. Your mind tells you that if you don't do something right now, you'll lose her forever. But this emotional urgency is exactly what pushes many people further away. Decisions made from panic rarely communicate confidence or maturity. Instead, they communicate dependence. The more desperately you try to hold on, the more you reinforce the very behaviors that damaged the relationship in the first place. Neediness is often misunderstood. It isn't simply missing someone or hoping for another chance. Missing someone is natural. Wanting to repair a relationship is human. Neediness begins when your emotional stability depends entirely on another person's response. It's when your mood rises and falls based on whether she replies to your messages. It's when you check your phone every few minutes, analyze every word she says, or convince yourself that your happiness cannot exist without her. In that state, your actions are no longer guided by wisdom, they are guided by fear. Fear makes people over-explain, over-pursue, and overreact, believing that more effort will produce more love, when it often creates the opposite effect. Psychologically, emotional dependence places invisible pressure on the other person. Instead of feeling chosen, she begins to feel responsible for your emotional well-being. Every unanswered message becomes a source of guilt. Every request for reassurance feels like another responsibility. Over time, the relationship shifts from being a place of mutual support to becoming a source of emotional obligation. Attraction struggles to survive when one person feels like they must constantly manage the emotional state of the other. Healthy relationships thrive when both people contribute emotional stability rather than constantly seeking it from each other. Emotional stability doesn't mean pretending you don't care or acting cold to make someone chase you. It means learning to manage your emotions without making someone else responsible for regulating them. It means allowing yourself to experience disappointment without immediately reacting to it. It means accepting uncertainty without trying to control every outcome. A calm person doesn't ignore pain. They simply refuse to let pain dictate every decision they make. This level of self-control creates an entirely different emotional presence. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond thoughtfully. Instead of seeking immediate relief, you focus on long-term growth. Developing emotional stability also requires building a life that isn't centered around one relationship. Continue working toward your goals, maintain your friendships, improve your physical health, and invest in your personal development. When your identity expands beyond being someone's partner, you naturally become more grounded. You stop seeing the relationship as the only source of purpose or happiness. Ironically, this shift often makes you more attractive because confidence grows from having a meaningful life, not from receiving constant validation. People are naturally drawn to those who can stand on their own emotionally because it creates a relationship based on choice rather than dependence. One of the strongest signs of emotional maturity is the ability to tolerate uncertainty without losing your sense of self. You may not know whether she will come back. You may never receive all the answers you want. You may not get the closure you imagined. But instead of allowing those unknowns to consume your thoughts, you continue becoming a better version of yourself, regardless of the outcome. That mindset changes everything, because your growth is no longer driven by fear of losing someone. It is driven by respect for the person you are becoming. One of the biggest misconceptions after a breakup is believing that saying "you've changed" is enough to make someone see you differently. It isn't. Anyone can make promises when they're afraid of losing someone. Anyone can promise to communicate better, become more patient, or never repeat the same mistakes again. But people who've been hurt have usually heard promises before. What they haven't always seen is consistent change. That's why genuine transformation is never announced. It is demonstrated. If your goal is to re-attract her, your focus shouldn't be on convincing her that you're different. It should be on becoming so different that she reaches that conclusion on her own. Real change starts by identifying the exact version of yourself that contributed to the relationship falling apart. If you became defensive every time she expressed a concern, learn how to listen without treating every conversation like an attack. If you constantly sought reassurance because of your own insecurities, build confidence through personal growth instead of depending on someone else to make you feel valuable. If you avoided difficult conversations, Develop the courage to address problems calmly before they become resentment. If you reacted with anger, silence, or emotional withdrawal during conflict, replace those habits with emotional regulation and honest communication. Growth isn't about becoming a completely different person. It's about removing the behaviors that consistently damaged your relationships. Many people mistake temporary effort for permanent change. They improve for a few weeks because they're motivated by the fear of losing someone, but once the emotional pressure fades, they slowly return to the same habits. Lasting transformation doesn't happen because you're trying to win someone back. It happens because you've accepted that the old version of you wasn't capable of creating the relationship you wanted. When your motivation shifts from getting her attention to becoming a healthier person, your growth becomes sustainable. You stop changing for approval and start changing because you genuinely value the person you're becoming. This transformation should also extend beyond your relationship habits. Build a life that reflects discipline, purpose, and emotional balance. Improve your physical health because taking care of yourself builds confidence and self-respect. Develop your career or pursue meaningful goals because purpose creates stability. Strengthen your friendships and spend time with people who encourage your growth rather than your excuses. Learn new skills, read books that challenge your thinking, and become someone who continues evolving regardless of who is watching. The more complete your life becomes, the less you depend on one relationship to define your identity. Psychologically, people are naturally curious when they encounter someone who no longer behaves the way they expect. If she remembers someone who is insecure, emotionally reactive, or constantly seeking validation, but later experiences someone who is calm, accountable, confident, and emotionally grounded, her perception begins to change. She may not admit it immediately, but the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Human beings often reassess their judgments when consistent evidence challenges their previous beliefs. This isn't about creating a fake version of yourself to impress her. It's about becoming someone whose actions consistently reflect maturity rather than insecurity. The most powerful transformations are often the quiet ones. You don't need to post every achievement on social media or tell people how much you've changed. You don't need to mention your self-improvement every chance you get. Confidence doesn't seek recognition because it isn't built on external validation. It reveals itself through everyday choices, calm responses, healthy boundaries, and the way you carry yourself under pressure. The version of you that deserves another opportunity is not the one making the loudest promises. It's the one whose consistent behavior makes those promises unnecessary. One of the most common mistakes people make after a breakup is believing they need one more conversation to prove they've changed. They think that if they can just explain everything clearly, express enough regret, or describe how much they've grown, the other person will finally understand. But real change doesn't need a presentation. It doesn't require a carefully written message or an emotional speech. The strongest evidence of growth is behavior that speaks so consistently that words become unnecessary. People may question what you say, but they pay close attention to what you repeatedly do. This is why actions carry far more psychological weight than promises. Words are processed intellectually, but behavior is experienced emotionally. Anyone can say they have become more patient, more mature, or more self-aware. Those statements are easy to make because they don't require proof in the moment. Actions, however, reveal whether those claims are actually true. If you used to become defensive during conflict, but now respond with calmness and accountability, that difference is noticed. If you once demanded constant reassurance, but now carry yourself with confidence and emotional stability, that change becomes difficult to ignore. People naturally trust what they consistently observe because actions reduce uncertainty in a way that words never can. Many people feel an urge to update their former partner on every positive change they make. They want to mention that they're going to the gym, reading more books, improving their career, or learning healthier communication. While these improvements are valuable, announcing them too often can unintentionally weaken their impact. It creates the impression that you're seeking recognition instead of genuinely transforming. Real confidence doesn't need constant acknowledgement. It allows results to become visible over time. When someone notices positive changes without being told, those changes feel authentic because they were discovered rather than advertised. Another important reality is that meaningful change takes time. You cannot expect years of unhealthy patterns to be erased after a few weeks of improved behavior. Trust is built slowly because the human mind naturally protects itself from disappointment. If someone has experienced repeated cycles of promises followed by the same mistakes, they will be cautious about believing new promises. That's not unfair, it's human nature. Consistency is what gradually lowers those defenses. Every calm reaction, every responsible decision, and every emotionally mature response becomes another piece of evidence that this version of you is different from the one they remember. There is also a difference between changing when someone is watching and changing because it has become part of your character. Temporary behavior is often driven by fear of losing someone. Permanent behavior is driven by personal values. If you're only patient because you hope she'll come back, that patience will disappear the moment you feel secure again. But if you've genuinely learned emotional discipline, it becomes part of who you are in every relationship and every situation. Lasting growth isn't something you perform for another person. It's something you practice until it becomes your natural response. The strongest position you can reach is one where you no longer feel the need to convince anyone of your worth. You don't chase opportunities to prove yourself because your daily actions already reflect your values. You don't argue with someone's perception because you understand that perception changes through experience, not persuasion. If your paths cross again, let your presence communicate what your words once tried to explain. Let your calmness replace your old reactions. Let your accountability replace your excuses. Let your discipline replace your inconsistency. When your behavior consistently reflects emotional maturity, the conversation begins before either of you says a single word. One of the biggest traps people fall into after a breakup is turning their entire life into a mission to win one person back. Every decision, every habit, and every improvement becomes centered around the same question: will this make her come back? They start going to the gym because they hope she'll notice. They work harder because they want to impress her. They read books about relationships only to fix the past. While self-improvement is valuable, it loses its power when it's driven entirely by the need for someone else's approval. If your growth depends on her response, then your happiness is still controlled by the relationship, even after it's over. This mindset creates an unhealthy emotional cycle. Every small sign from her becomes a source of hope or disappointment. If she replies to a message, you feel excited. If she doesn't, you feel defeated. If she views your social media story, you spend hours wondering what it means. If she starts dating someone else, your motivation disappears. Your entire emotional state becomes tied to things you cannot control. Psychologically, this is one of the fastest ways to lose your sense of identity, because your focus shifts away from becoming a stronger person and toward trying to manage another person's choices. Real growth begins when you stop asking, "How do I get her back?" and start asking, "How do I become a better man, regardless of who stays in my life?" That single shift changes everything. Instead of chasing an outcome, you begin building a foundation. You improve your health because you want more energy and discipline. You strengthen your career because purpose creates confidence and independence. You develop emotional intelligence because every future relationship will benefit from it. You build meaningful friendships because your life should never depend on one person for all your emotional support. These changes are no longer temporary strategies. They become permanent investments in yourself. Another important truth is that attraction often grows when someone sees that your life has genuine direction. People are naturally drawn to those who have purpose beyond the relationship. When your identity revolves entirely around one person, you unintentionally place enormous pressure on them to become your source of happiness, confidence, and meaning. That responsibility is exhausting. Healthy relationships are strongest when two people bring full lives together, not when one person expects the relationship to become their entire world. Independence doesn't weaken emotional connection. It strengthens it by allowing love to exist without emotional dependence. This also means accepting that you cannot control whether she returns. You can control your habits, your mindset, your character, and your future, but you cannot control another person's feelings or decisions. Many people waste months trying to influence an outcome that isn't theirs to decide. They replay old conversations, imagine different scenarios, and search for the perfect strategy to change someone else's mind. Meanwhile, they neglect the only life they are fully responsible for improving, their own. Emotional maturity is recognizing the difference between influence and control. You can become someone worthy of a healthy relationship, but you cannot force someone to choose you. Ironically, the moment you stop making her your only goal is often the moment you become your most attractive. Not because you're pretending to move on or playing psychological games, but because your confidence is no longer dependent on one person's validation. You become calmer because your future no longer hangs on a single outcome. You make better decisions because fear is no longer controlling your behavior. You carry yourself differently because your self-worth comes from your values, your discipline, and your personal growth instead of someone else's approval. Whether she comes back or not, your life continues moving forward. Your purpose continues growing, and your identity becomes too strong to be defined by one relationship. Your greatest victory isn't getting someone back, it's becoming someone who never loses himself again. Build your confidence, protect your self-respect, and let your actions define your character. Whether she returns or not, the strongest relationships begin with a stronger version of you. Keep growing and let your life become your greatest proof.